The New England Watercolor Society has been active since 1885, starting as the Boston Watercolor Society. Since that time, the organization has been showcasing talent, but also the rich possibilities of water-based color. To tell us about this year's signature member show, open through March 3rd, are the Society's president, Wendy Hale, and the chair of the show, Francis Schreiber. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you.
I want to start with Wendy. You took this photo of the window, where this is going to be happening. Tell me what went through your mind when you were framing this picture.
Well, it's at the Guild of Boston Artists, which is at 162 Newbury Street, which is just a few doors down from where we first exhibited at the Arts and Crafts Building, which is now the Snowden School, International School, at the corner of Dartmouth and Newbury Street. And New England Watercolor has been was showing there and at the Museum of Fine Arts until the Museum of Fine Arts decided they weren't going to do groups anymore. So that's a beautiful window.
Francis, you know, people who don't work with this all the time like me, I think of watercolor as a muted, quiet kind of color. But in a day like today, you've got duck boats. You can do watercolors of duck boats. Talk about this.
I think what's been amazing about the change in watercolor, and this is what's showing up now, is a watercolor that was done to honor the ball game winning, but the colors are often much more intense. There's much more experimental. They've been changing the kind of paper that they paint on, and so you'll find in this show intense colors, a whole range of textures, just an enormous variety of the ways you can paint with watercolor.
And I love the title too. We should share that, make sure people hear it. The Damage Done.
Right.
What's interesting here, and I know, I mean, there's some artistic license, of course, the yellow vest and the yellow leaves. I mean, what's going through people's mind, when they make those connections?
Well, it's a contrast of colors. You've got the yellow and the green going on, and it's just, you can have liberty when you're painting. You don't have to stick to the different colors, but it unites the painting.
It unites the painting, and at the same time, you know, people, I've taken some photos. I hate yellow vests. They're so loud, you know, and it's so unartistic. And here's an artist who says, no problem.
They're great.
and Becky Halecki, who did the painting, tends to paint with soft colors. And so even though it's the Red Sox, their red is a softer red than one would think of. And so all of her paintings have a gentleness to them, whatever the theme is.
Wendy, just as timely for different reasons, you've got ice and fire and wind, a very wintry subject there. Explain this one.
Explain. Well, Bob Noriega, who's the artist of this painting, uses acrylics as well as watercolor, and he mixes them together. And he just goes with gusto. I mean, he was our Silver Award winner last year, and he's magical. And he paints so quickly, and as I say, with gusto. It's amazing. And gets that feeling. You've got the yellow against the blue, the contrasting colors just makes it vibrant.
And he always has white that somehow leads you through his paintings in spite of all, and he paints very loosely and very quickly.
Now the ability of water paint to convey solid water, what about that, Francis? I mean, how do you get that to work? I mean, here this looks like I can almost bite into it.
Right, and this was actually done with liquid acrylic, but in the same technique that a transparent watercolor would be painted.
Right.
And he would achieve the same thing with transparent watercolor by layering it enough to get the intense colors.
Wendy, there's another one here by Stashenko. They look like arches. It's called Illusions of Grandeur. What was this one about?
This one is one of the chairs of the show. She and Francis co-chaired the show. And Kristen has made a whole thing of doing using gouache. And gouache is a very difficult medium to do because you have to put it in, and if you start layering it, you can get really muddy because it's got this texture to it. It's not like acrylic that you can layer on, or oils you can layer on, and watercolor you can even layer on. This is, once you start adding it, the colors mix. If you didn't want them to mix, you could be in trouble.
Right. And it's an opaque, very opaque paint. So unlike the transparent watercolors where you, if you want a gray, you might layer a red, a blue, a yellow, a red, a blue, a yellow until you end up with 10 fine layers that will give you the gray. With this, you can't layer it. You can't see through it. So where you put it is where it is. And it's, I've tried it before, it's tough. And Kristen does it beautifully. It's very soft when it's painted. You know, it's very,
You know, if you put this on a spectrum, you're going from painting almost up to illustration or even cartoon. Why this particular medium in this subject, you think?
Well, she has taken this and mastered it. She tried other watercolor, liquid watercolor and regular watercolor, and she said, I spoke to her and she's like, no, I tried that and found that this is for me. Everybody tries different mediums, different papers, and finds out what works for them. And in water media, there's different avenues to go.
Enormous variability. Also, Kristen is going to be doing a gallery talk on Sunday, the 2nd.
March 2nd.
March 2nd. So what we're doing is every Saturday we have gallery talks at 1 o'clock, and every Sunday we're having watercolor demonstrations from 1 to 2:30. So if people come in, they're welcome to be part of that.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Frances Schreiber and Wendy Hale from the New England Watercolor Society. Wendy, we have another painting of an owl. Wait a minute. This is the strange one here. Bits of metal in rust. Another unlikely subject.
Carolyn Latinish was raised near this factory, and she has gone in and she has taken so many images from this factory. She's gone to town with it. She's wonderful. And she takes a factory, a picture of a factory, of a machine, and then takes pieces, eliminates them, and in her mind and on the paper, and draws it and changes it. So, and then she puts the color in, and it's magic. It's just amazing what she can do with that.
She grew up near the blast furnaces when the steel industry was going full force, and now as it has died, she's really tried to capture parts of it. And so she's done a lot of painting. But what's also wonderful about her paintings is you can see with the transparent watercolors how she mixes the colors right on the paper. So you'll see colors kind of develop between a red and a blue, and you'll get a purpley tone. But she doesn't mix the purple and put it on. You can actually see the way the colors flow together and give kind of an intensity of color.
In contrast with the previous painting, you see these gradations of color and the
Yes.
sense of depth here.
Absolutely.
Right. And with watercolor, you can mix it on the palette and put it on. But if you do a little bit of one color and drop in water and then tip the paper, you can get them to mix in magical ways. And that's one of the advantages of coming to the demonstrations. You can see people doing this.
Now you say it's magic. I mean, it looks to me like it's hard to control, too.
It is hard to control. That's the magic of watercolor. It's a challenge and makes it fun because, I mean, if you put it down, like oil, you put it down and it stays there. Watercolor, it talks back.
Okay. Frances, here we have not a lot of color, but a lot of white.
Right. Steve Hamlin is a nature painter. And right now this week he's off in Rhode Island taking more pictures of the snowy owls. And he's a wonderful painter, but he also, although the painting itself will be developed, the bird or the animal, he's really quite faithful to the structure of it. And I think he loves the snowy owl. And this is a very...
It's wonderful.
Now, when you say structure here, this isn't just the structure of the bird. I mean, you see the pattern in the wings in the background.
Right.
A lot of almost the same pattern.
Yeah.
Right. And you can see him also mix his colors on the paper. You get a lot of granulation when he wants to do that in the rocks. And he uses the white to kind of move you through the painting itself.
And the repeat of the pattern of the feathers to the rocks is just magical.
Now we have another sort of a study in white coming up here, mostly white that is. And I guess this was the winner.
This is the gold
Gold
medal.
Anything about the subject himself, the trumpet player?
Well, this is done by Irina Roman, who has done a series of people who have retired from their profession and have either returned to a previous love or have taken up a hobby and are going to town with it. And this is an example of one, Harvey, who I love the fact that she has taken this and there's so much white in it, but the background is lovely. When we were talking about granulation of the pigment, she did 3 layers of granulation to get it that dark before she even encountered doing the figure. I would have done the figure first and the background later to see if it was even worth it. Why do all this background and then not get the figure right? But she didn't worry about this.
She's a wonderful graphic artist as well as painter, so she worries less about the figure but puts a huge amount of time into it. But what you can see and what's interesting is as she was building, she pours. She protects the white and pours the color. And you can see the last pour, which was the dark color, break up. And you can see the earlier color showing through it. And then, of course, she
literally
picks it.
tipping the paper.
Yeah, and I'm intrigued by the strategic deployment of yellow here. The face, the instrument, and yellow comes out at you. I mean, it's very nicely matched, isn't it?
Yes. And she knows exactly what she's doing to bring parts of the painting forward and to let part of it move back. And she can paint very delicately. There's very subtle, you can't see it as well here, but very subtle gradations in the shadows in the face and lost and found edges. And she's a wonderful painter.
She is.
And this is a big painting.
This is another one. Yes, there is some yellow here, and there's some blue, and turtles galore. What would we call this?
It's like a pixelation. It's waves of not pixelation, that's prisming.
She calls it color weave.
Oh, color weave. That's a good term for it.
But she titled it Turtle Turtle. You can't imagine why.
Turtle, turtle, turtle.
And she's one of our newest members. She came in and became a signature member just this year. But she had also worked with children, teaching children art for a long time, and there's often a very playful quality to her paintings.
It's texture, but there's something about it here. It is like looking into a pond, through a lighted surface and seeing something underneath. I mean, how does water do that? Watercolor, that is. You get that shimmering kind of effect.
You have light against dark, so you have a little bit of light, and then it's all about looking. When you're painting, when artists learn to paint, it's not just learning the materials, it's learning to see. And she definitely knows how to see. You can.
All right, we have another painting. This is, I think, from Ogunquit, Maine. Another water subject in a very different way here. It positively sprays.
It's done on a fabric called Yupo, which is a plastic paper. And if you think painting on watercolor paper is hard, on paper, which is made out of cotton, is hard, this, you really have to paint flat because it will roll off there's nothing holding it. There's no tooth to the paper. It's like painting on Mylar. And you paint on it, and you can put different textures on it, let it dry, and then lift it. And the textures, like if you did bubble wrap, you'd get little dots. And then if you try and go over it, you can go one sweep over that paint if you wanted to layer it. But if you do a couple of times, you'll wipe it right off. So you can get back to the white very easily, but to layer on top is very difficult, and
it's hard to maintain it.
You have to know what you're doing.
And she likes textures. We were trying to figure out how she got the sky. The other parts I can kind of figure out, but I don't know how she got that bubble quality, but she tries to get different textures in her painting. And we actually have 4 different artists in this show who are painting on Yupo.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the newest and more experimental ways of using watercolor. and it's pretty exciting.
It's really fun.
Finally, a more traditional approach and subject here. Countryside. It's called August shade, but then of course in August you don't see much shade. You see more sunlight, right?
Right. Well, there's some of that. And it leads you right in. She just has those luscious greens. They're not out of a tube. She's mixed them, and the road just, like Hockney, just leads you right in.
And when Wendy looked at it, when we looked at it and we're choosing it, she said, well, we should end with that because we should really say, well, come visit us at the Guild.
Wendy, you both sound like you have all these conversations with the people who are in, every year, and you must be absorbing things from each other. I mean, does this work that way for everybody who's involved here?
People share a lot of how they do things, what they do, like to talk about what. There's a lot of experimentation that's going on these days with watercolor. Some of it's very traditional, but a lot of it is pushing the boundaries of what it can do. And people are very open about sharing how they do it, what they've tried, which paints they use, because each brand of watercolor will look different.
The colors, the pigments are different, as they're not exactly the same. And when we have our that's why we have our demos, and so for people to learn more about it. And that's our mission statement, is to share the love of watercolor and to teach people. So we do teach each other.
And one of the people painting on Yupo actually sprays her colors on, and she uses the kind of cobwebs that kids use on Halloween, and she puts that on the paper and she sprays, and then she plays with colors. And it's a wonderful painting. We didn't have a good reproduction of it, so we didn't bring it in, but it's there at the show.
Wendy, I know this goes through March 6th, and you've got a couple of events you want
March 3rd.
people to, with March 3rd rather. You have a couple of events you want people to key in on as well.
Yes, every Saturday we have a gallery talk, and every Sunday we have demos, watercolor demos, and those are both at 1 o'clock.
And Frances, you've got a website for people to get more details on this too?
Right? You want to give it?
NewEnglandWatercolorSociety.org.
Good. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thank you, Chris.
We'll have more news in just a moment.